To St. Andrews College, located on the campus of the University of Manitoba. I'm the acting director of the Center for Ukrainian Canadian Studies, located here at the college itself and housed here at the college. I want to welcome everybody to our lecture series. We have usually lectures on a regular basis, on a monthly basis. And this coming year, basically, we digitized now all of the presentations. And what has happened is we realized that a lot of people sometimes can't make it at a particular time, but online, it seems to be that the numbers are much more higher in order to listen to the presentations themselves. Our speaker this afternoon, a little bit about the individual that we have invited, Dr. Oleksandr Kondrashov. He studied in Lviv, Ukraine at the Polytechnical University, completed his Master of Social Work at the University of Manitoba. His focus was, I believe, on Ukrainian immigration, to Winnipeg from Ukraine itself. He taught at Dalhousie University, and also he's currently the assistant professor at Thompson Rivers University, the School of Social Work, Human Services, but I also believe you're part of the Faculty of Education there. So I mean, it's like having a number of titles under your, or wearing several hats as you go. He's also a specialist in the online delivery of courses. I believe his PhD also examined those particular areas of research. His topic, or his presentation, the theme that he's going to be focusing on is the fifth wave of Ukrainian immigration in Winnipeg. And is there a need for a new study? So it'll be interesting to hear what he has to say about that particular direction. Before I invite him to come and give the talk, just to welcome a few additional guests. We have the Dean of Theology of St. Andrews College, Father Roman Bozic, in attendance. We have Dr. Bala Niku, originally from India, but he's the acting chair of School of Social Work. So we're very pleased, from Thompson Rivers University. And we have also Dr. Brad McKenzie, the former professor from social work. And so we're very pleased that we have a variety of guests in attendance. We also have, I've jotted down here, Professor Dr. Karen Duncan, which is the community science, is that the area?
Community health sciences.
Community health sciences. I know it's gone through several changes, human ecology, everything is decentralized or changed, maybe some new directions, but welcome also to the presentation itself. So at this stage, I'll welcome, or ask Dr. Kondrashov to take the stage.
I'm Sasha, but normally, so I appreciate all of you coming here. It means a lot to me coming home because I just arrived 2 days ago back to my Canadian home, which I originally came, and like Kavitsky, was the first home where I lived in Winnipeg for the first time in 2000. Thanks to the Dr. Bedlakis of our program to building it on. Whenever I usually start, I always want to acknowledge where are we now in terms of where I got knowledge. I'm thankful for the Center of Ukrainian Studies for bringing and allowing me to do the presentation today, as well as St. Andrews College to be at this place. I'm very grateful to have a small reunion opportunity to connect with people who supported me across my lifespan when I was in Canada. As well, my family who are not at this time around here in Transcona, friends, peers, colleagues, and everyone who made it happen. For sure, Thompson Rivers University, where I'm currently, have an opportunity to enjoy my position, and all of the universities where I had an opportunity to teach, University of Manitoba, Dalhousie University, and the University of Winnipeg, which allow me to share the knowledge and faculty. We are here connecting on the land where learning and teaching is what happened on many, many years before us. So it's exciting to be here and to share that story and enjoyment. In terms of geographical location, that's where I was born. That's where I enjoy my life as a childhood in terms of everything that I enjoyed here, then here, and now here. It's all these universities across Canada. That's where Ukrainian immigration was happening, one person was moving, but there was many more people were coming from Ukraine, and that will be the topic and idea to share today, because it's actually more than 10 years ago on this day, Brad McKenzie was here with me when I completed my MSW degree. And exactly 2 years ago, this day, meaning this month, in June 2016, I completed my PhD here too. That's meant a lot to me in terms of being on this particular space. And no matter how far away I'm in Canada from my Canadian home, Winnipeg is. So I'm glad to be here. And I actually put this slide because that was my final presentation for MSW. That's how it started. I've changed everything else, but I kept the first original slide when I did my study, because as I come as an immigrant, I was very privileged and lucky immigrant. I have amazing support system. People here, people in Transcona, people at University of Manitoba helped me to be successful, to become successful, and to achieve what I can do right now in terms of teaching, being part of the academic environment, sharing my knowledge with students. And it's all started here, and I wanted to learn what's happening with people who come to Canada from different parts of Ukraine. When they settle, what's some of the process of adaptation. So that was 10 years ago, and today I will try to share what was the findings and how many things might change or not change. And that's something which we'll have a discussion today about. What is there is a fixed way of immigration, and I will give definition of what are different waves of immigration and say how immigration, why the wave can make a difference reasons people coming to Canada. That's something which we will talk and share today, and look on if there is a need for new study. That will be the question. If there is a new need to ask what's the adaptation process of people in Canada of Ukrainian background who came recently to Winnipeg. Actually, we're only looking on Winnipeg today, although many places have different Ukrainian immigrants. So that's where I will bring to the main web slide, which gives you some chronological idea of what it means first, second, third, fourth, or fifth possible way of immigration. So originally, and remember it's all based on the written documents. There is many things which we might not know, which was not documented in writing, but this is based on what we know, what was documented in terms of first wave of Ukrainian immigration, 1891. That's when the first time we hear names of Ukrainian immigrants identifying Ukraine came to what we know called Winnipeg and trying to settle in there. Although it's coming to Canada, it's the first way of Canadian immigration. So people usually started from Halifax. That usually was a Procure 21, as many Ukrainians who originally came and then they take a trade, and Winnipeg was one of the points. But for sure there was many points going further, and the first way considered to be the name of the way is primarily economic. Although that's how literature says in terms of definition. Economic is mean reasons for coming. People were looking for land. That's the time when Canada was alive. It's the time when Canadian government decided to populate the prairie land and build settlements and providing homesteads. It was $10, I think I remember, for 160 acres of land. But that was the first before the First World War. The second wave, considered to be political, which moved from 1918 to 1939, when Ukraine was going into time, moving into that's actually after October Revolution, 1917, change in political structure. People were coming not primarily for economic reasons, but to escape the system in Ukraine from 1917 to before the start of the Second World War. So there's always this period of stopping, 1914, 1918, because at that time there was war, so immigration was not easy to see because people all were in World War I, World War II. 1939, 1945. 1946 considered to be internment migration, where people were coming to Canada, and at the same time there was a number of after war migration. So it's still political. People were escaping regime, and there was a number of people who came, but not as we see the numbers were quite rising in terms of Ukrainians in Winnipeg. I give the last, it simply means how many people were identified Ukrainian in Winnipeg during those times, approximately. So Winnipeg population grew up to 79,000. That's actually, when I was starting my study, 1991, that's the fourth wave of Ukrainian immigration after independence. When Ukraine gained independence, that's a reason where primarily gain become more economic immigration, meaning people are coming to find a better place to live with economic. It does not mean that they are all very specific for reasons. There was always political, economic going back and forth. I was trying to find out what was the adaptation process at that time for people who moved from 1991, and I was doing my study in 2007, 2006. So that's when I actually asked people to share their experience. So at that time I interviewed 16 people, and they shared with me some of the challenging successes of immigration. So why I'm talking about the fifth wave? That's what the new way, and why it should be discussed more in terms of, there is no literature, just to say, there is no discussion right now in the literature if there is a fifth wave. That's my definition of looking, and the reason why I'm looking, because in 2014, the eastern part of Ukraine get into war. That's where we see Donbass and Donetsk area in terms of an annexation of Crimea, which was part of Ukraine. So interesting, it will be good to explore, and that's why one of the reasons will be, is there is a change in terms of reasoning for coming from Ukraine after 2014 till 2018, right now where we're here. We know people are coming because the Winnipeg population are growing. I will show you numbers how many people actually came. This is simply mean how many people identify Ukrainians in Winnipeg. Right now, around 99,000 people in the city, which is around, we'll look for the numbers in terms of population of provinces, 1.2 billion. So it's quite a large number identified Ukrainian. And that's only based on the definition. When people settle, they usually, I hope it will work, but they try to build, and I always say it, I won't talk about Winnipeg, but there is a thought about, they call this is our land. In Ukrainian version, so this land is your land. But the Ukrainians always do everything into Ukrainian language, so they think it, I hope it will work, but let's see if it will. Briefly, but if it's not, it will. In terms of saying that Ukrainians travel across Canada. So it's only we are focusing on Winnipeg, but I always want to recognize that the numbers actually were settling across Canada. The interesting part, what was happening, it was attitudes towards immigration. We always think about how it started and why people were coming, or allowed to come. Most of the time it was about allowed to come. When immigration is not really like you can move to another place. There's lots of challenges. So Ukrainians were allowed to come to Canada from the immigrants of the second sort. That's how it was called in the literature. Ignorant, dirty, priestly, moral ignorance, and fit to become citizens of democratic states. That was the attitude at the beginning of coming Ukrainians in the First World War. And that was the Minister of Labor Cipher, it's documented in the literature. To what they were saying, is the European element, that's when Ukrainians finally were allowed to come to Canada. It's first wave of immigration. They include Ukrainians which name itself Halichane, Ukrainian name actually from the area where I came. are more adjusted for settling in the west of Canada than people from Western Europe. So the idea was like, okay, fine, they can do it. Can be living. And Tuesday, Sifton expressed his views on Ukrainian immigration in such a way: I think a stalwart peasant in a sheepskin coat, born on the soil, whose forefathers have been farmers for 10 generations, with a stout wife and a half dozen children, is good quality. That was welcoming. And we'll talk about what's the ideas, how you feel welcome to in a country where you started. But it's always good to remind us that whenever somebody was coming to Canada, it was not as, yeah, let's provide support services and have all of the ideas. It was very challenging from the day one. And for sure, whenever somebody comes, I was looking for different pictures, because I will situate now current first way and say what's the difference. But there you can see the major difference. When people come to the land, there was nothing at that time. The women were logging. That's in terms of gender equality, thinking how ideas, working, and everyone else were building houses inside of whatever was available. At that time accessible, there was no roads, nothing. People went through all the challenges to come to this place, which is now, and again, Winnipeg was considered to be a high quality immigration because it was an urban setting. This is primarily on rural and homesteads, and people were having a hard time building everything what we now have in this particular case. So that's Ukrainian, one of the migration. Remember, we can look on different ethnic groups. I'm only doing Ukrainian today, but it all can be traced to different. So, Ukrainians in Canada were settling across places. We now have the largest settlement in different ways. This is the first wave, second wave, and the third wave. So Manitoba usually has a very strong, as we noticed, that's where the distribution of Ukrainian immigration in Canada, Manitoba has the largest numbers during the second and the first. We have much more less presence, so it's actually decreased, and you will see it's actually decreasing right now in terms of immigration. So it's happened in waves when people come in terms of time. In recent, we now have in Canada, based on, I was looking, 20.6% of Canada's population, 1/5 is immigrant. In terms of Ukrainians, right now, Manitoba is no longer in the top 4. I will talk about where Manitoba is still a leader, but not in the top 4 of numbers. We have Ukrainians who now resides in 90% Ontario, British Columbia, Quebec, and Alberta. That's very an interesting distribution in terms of new immigration. Winnipeg changing its own way of Ontario has the largest numbers of Ukrainian immigrants coming in mass from 2001 to 2011. That's again newcomers. And yeah, for the third, Manitoba actually steadily have around 4,000 people who are considered to be immigrant at that time. So they don't become permanent when they are born outside of Canada. In terms of citizens from Ukraine landed in Canada, each year from 2000, I could not see, sorry, from 2006, it's not a good quality slide, but 2006, from 2015, around 2,000 people coming every year. Various numbers are different, but around 2,000 people every year come from Ukraine. One thing which I was pointed out, I was actually very excited. This year, we have this Ukrainian Winnipeg. It's a new journal for last 3 years. That's another good identifier in terms of the first way. They're produced by new immigrants who are putting together a journal, and I can pass different issues so you will see what issue, what type of things they cover. Just so you know that there is a journal every month passed, and they share ideas, what's happening with immigrants, what type of programs, supports. And recently, while I was looking through all their 39 issues, but luckily it's all available alive, they put a new tables to share what's happening actually in Manitoba in terms of number of Ukrainians. So right now in Manitoba, where we see in all Manitoba, there is 180,000 Ukrainians, and they have 17,000 speak Ukrainian language, who identify in the census. That's based on the 2016 census. That's Manitoba. In other provinces, so Yukon,
There is very few Ukrainian speaking. Newfoundland, Prince Edward Island 25, Nova Scotia 425, but 9,000. New Brunswick, Quebec, Ontario. The largest Ontario, Alberta, British Columbia. So this is where the numbers. And here there is a percentage of population. That's actually where the most interesting data comes. So Manitoba still has the largest percentage of Ukrainians across Canada. So there is 14% who identify Ukrainians in Manitoba. We see Saskatchewan 13, Ontario 2.8, but population of Ontario is bigger, so that's where the numbers is higher. But so Winnipeg is still the highest concentration of Ukrainians in Canada. So that's why it's not changing as much as historically. And this is the latest census data from 2016. So there is a large percentage of Ukrainian and those who speak Ukrainian language. So we recently also, first of all, we are very lucky we have a Ukrainian program in Manitoba, so that helps to maintain that particular ability to speak the language and to have strong connection in terms of language learning. But in terms of, and Ukrainians in Manitoba, if I was looking in Winnipeg, Ukrainians in Winnipeg are considered to be, first is English, then Canadians if you identify by census, third is Scottish, then it's German, and the fourth is Ukrainian, or fifth is Ukrainian. So it's still largest ethnic population in terms of Manitoba. In terms of how many people immigrated, so that's actually the interesting part of, for me, was always a study, how many numbers actually immigrated to Winnipeg. To Winnipeg, from 1980 till 1990, 140 people came, just before the end of the Soviet Union. We start seeing high rise from 1991 to 2000. There was actually, it's mostly, we think about triple to Winnipeg after Ukraine became independent. Then, from 2000, in new millennium, for first 10 years, from 2001 to 2010, 1,345 people came from Ukraine, migrated. And in the last 5 years, we see most 1,000. So actually, it's a large number. If we think about in 5 years, we have 1,000. In 10 years, we have 1,345. So there is a spike right now in terms of numbers of coming from Ukraine. So that's where I'm starting thinking about the fifth wave of Ukrainian immigration, because there is larger numbers coming. In total, it's 3,000 people who came in from 1980. And the second one is in Manitoba. This is numbers of Manitoba. So mostly people settled in Winnipeg. We can see the numbers are very different. Like it shows that rural Manitoba do not take a lot. It's around 700 people goes to the rural Manitoba. And in total in Canada, by this number, we have 63. Ukrainian team on the different ethnic group representation. But now, why I was bringing the idea, there is a need to new study, because situation in Ukraine unfortunately changed in the last 3 years. With the war, what's happened usually when there's war, people migrate. People move from place to place. In Ukraine, in 1 year, UNICEF helped 227,000 children out of 1,492 people who were displaced in Ukraine. I think only in this particular period of after the third year of the war, which currently happening between Ukraine and Russia. This war happens every day. I mean, people die every day. News happens every single updates, and people not sure what's happening, what type of stability in terms of and migration increases. Migration internally, but migration also externally. And the question is, what type of supports, what type of issues are coming and bringing it, what type of needs Ukrainians will have in this particular war period. That's something which is not yet studied. If somebody wants to learn about the conflict in Ukraine, there is a book, I'm not talking about this in detail today, but there is a book I found available freely online by Oxford University Press. It's a good one. It answers many questions which people have about the war in Ukraine. In terms of what's happening right now, what some of the challenges is from 2015 But it gives you, and it's again fully available online. What I like about the book, it gives you many academic answers, meaning they give you in detail analysis of what's happening, who were, that gives you some history making Ukraine after communism, describes the Orange Revolution and Euromaidan, which lead to the Revolution of Dignity, and gives you detailed analysis. So I personally, in terms of explaining what is Tatar, how it started, using the word. So I found this a very good resource to learn about the current situation. It's in English too, which actually helps a lot. An academic publisher, which I'm also excited to see a book which provides a detailed analysis of what's happened in Ukraine. So that's the conflict and the situation from perspective of displacement, which I, thanks to family social sciences, I enjoy teaching that course, learned a lot about internal displaced and refugees. We have a lot of people who are displaced in Ukraine right now. There was one study which I looked, the Religion and International Migration, a case study of Ukraine. The last year period was still 2015, and there is still the main reasons for migration is unemployment, job search, and desire for self-realization and better living condition. Political stability was in 2015 very little concern. That's based on religious preferences. They look for Ukrainian Catholics who were migrating and Ukrainian Orthodox. And the study was done to measure how people feel about what the reasons for migration or leaving Ukraine. That's the only type of study which I actually found in terms of why people are leaving, but at that time it was only covering 2015, so there was nothing after the war, when the war started, in detail analysis. From my study, though, I will go back to the one 10 years ago, there were some concerns which came from the study, and that will require later discussion. So I was able to talk to 16 recent immigrants at that time, 2008, who were in Canada for more than 7 years, was 3 people. Mostly people stay for 4 to 7. And at that time, I didn't have anybody from Eastern Ukraine. Actually, it was interesting. When I did my study in 2007, there was nobody from Eastern Ukraine who responded. We have 3 mostly from Western. So it's another thing which I want to hear for future. Do we have anybody from Eastern Ukraine coming from the war zone? There is not too much. The census data did not give us. So we do not know if it will be from Eastern Ukraine or Western Ukraine. Simply say Ukraine. But is it from war-torn part of Ukraine or not? So that's something which need to be detailed. I put some quotes which were common concerns at that time. It was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, one was the reason. The major problem is that I was not sure what would happen in the future. So the concerns when I did the study was primarily, again, economic. I'm not too sure it's unstable, but looking on economy, was it change in last 5 years? We do not know. That's something which we need to see. If the people are moving economically, what do they move now politically? They're moving to escape the war. At that time, I never have those concerns. The problem was that main job did not provide with a sufficient salary, therefore I had to get an extra job. One participant said, if I knew where to get the money, the taxes were incredibly high, there was no stability. So that was the reason for migration of the forced labor. Was it changed or not? We don't know, because the war might change that. Credential recognition. 10 years ago, that was the biggest concern about education. In terms of learning with Ukrainians when they come to Canada, many times their degree is not recognized, meaning they study for a number of years to be a doctor, they practice. One of the suggestions from my study was actually to conduct a study in 10 years to see do they have better opportunity now to recognize their credential. Because at that time, if you want to immigrate to Canada as a doctor, you need to know that you are required. There is prejudice towards immigrant doctors. Canadian doctors are protected the market. That was the quotes from last year, last 10 years, it was 2008. Is it relevant right now? Do Canada make any improvements? Based on the current data, it's become still hard to become a doctor. From immigrants, it's usually 1% only immigrant doctors can ever enter to the residency in Canada. That's based on the recent data. So it still might be a concern if we have any doctors from Ukraine. In Ukraine, I never had a problem of getting a job. In Canada, many people feel prejudice towards immigrants. I'm under the impression that if you have the Canadian education, you wouldn't experience any problems with employment. Foreign education is not recognized. It's again the same idea. If a person practicing in Ukraine, is it happened 10 years later? I don't know. That's another reason why we need to have this study. to actually make sure, is this discrimination still at workplace? Is degrees are devalued? And a big issue, there was a large concern of discrimination in terms of looking what is right. If you're an immigrant in Canada, you feel like an immigrant, especially at work. That was expressed by 10 years ago. I have experienced discrimination for Canadians and Ukrainians by their attitude towards immigrants, how they treat, in terms of there was discussion. Have it changed in the last 10 years? No data, again, nothing, but we still have data in general in studies which say if discrimination exists. That's how it's affected. Language and readiness to immigrate. This was actually where I seen a lot of change in terms of many immigrants were coming to Winnipeg at that time, were thinking there was lots of support from Ukrainian. You can learn Ukrainian and you will be fine in Winnipeg because every 8th person speaks Ukrainian. Yeah, that was this from people from Ukraine who believe that when you come to Winnipeg, fine, you'll do well. No, that was a big shock and barrier for many of my participants, whereas they're like, no, you need to know English, and I've seen a lot of push right now in terms of recognizing that English is critical for your success. And many more in terms of understanding that language is critical for successful adaptation. So whenever you have discussion in Winnipeg, many done both in English and in Ukrainian. So you will actually recognize that it's all done in 2 languages. While Ukrainian exists, English is still critical. So even people who have some English saw differences in pronunciation. We need to be more prepared for immigration. That was a larger area, and I start seeing more and more, and I will show you where it comes. One thing which happened recently is the rise of the Facebook. And Facebook is one of the ways where people can get information and connect more clearly with Canadians, Ukrainians. I've been recently learned there is a nice group, I think we have some members of the group here, called Ukrainian Manitoba. This is where majority of the people right now, it's never existed before, it's actually quite recent. It just started in July 2016, where Ukrainians asking questions when they come before coming to Canada, whereas they connect with local people and they have this very interesting forum where a moderator, the person who runs it, has a section called Questions in Private, where Ukrainian immigrants can post a question, nobody knows the name, and people share their ideas. This is so, for me to notice it, that's actually what many people in the second study say, in my last study say, it will be so needed. So to see this is developed in the last 2 years, incredible. This is a support group of mutual groups. There is 1,600 people in the group, actually 1,754. So it's growing, and this is people who are living in Manitoba, who are Ukrainians who are sharing any ideas of what to do, any concern, and that's wonderful. That's actually what many people in seconds, when my study was done, saying we do not have information. We do not know how to access people who are in Canada to ask many things. Right now, all of this is described and discussed, and there is lots of opportunities for mutual exchange, and that's actually very helpful for immigration. That's another thing which I wanted to ask newcomers when I will do, if I do new study, to see was it helpful and how it was helpful. Because from my perspective and from those participants who shared last time, that was lacking. That was lacking to know what's happening in terms of Canada immigration. So I see more and more connection, and that actually helps people to share challenges. And another study can be done on the content problem, but readiness for to immigrate was the biggest concern, and many people now share that, because I started realizing that mentally I was not ready for the immigration. That's what people shared with me. I didn't know that it wouldn't be that simple. I didn't do any preparation work, meaning learning English. I should have just started taking it in Ukraine. So because of that group, more people will know what's required. And that's very, very helpful. Another thing which is happening right now, because in that group there is many members from different community organizations, what I found 10 years ago, that community connection was very weak by Ukrainian communities. To me, 10 years ago, participants were sharing that they have a hard time to connect with Ukrainian community. That was, we knew that there were many Ukrainians in Winnipeg, but we didn't realize boundaries of that community. Our relatives helped us at the beginning. They took us to the Ukrainian Congress, and we had a chance to see Ukrainian organization. However, we were disappointed with the range of their services and decided to rely on ourselves. So there's a very limited connection. I believe we can't expect too many things from the community. We need to believe in ourselves, finding our own community. And that forum creates a space for that new community. That's actually what's quite exciting. I agree with that fact that Ukrainian community organizations do exist and deliver services. However, in order to be heard, sometimes it's essential to participate in those organizations. So that's what concerned last time. People participation is less. I'm hoping new study, if it's needed, we will find out if this increased participation or we have still challenges. Although, based what data I've seen also with the forum, there is much more support. And the same with Ukrainian diaspora. People were, at that time when I took it 10 years ago, sharing with me, all I saw were conflicts between the force and the other ways of Ukrainian immigration. People were fighting in terms of, and literature was sharing at that time, people who come from different reasons sometimes do not get connected well. So think about political reasons and economic. That's two different types of reasons. So it's not always easy to connect. However, it will be good to see what's happened recently. Is there is connection? Is this built? Was there still division? And in terms of fourth wave and other wave, oh, there's a fifth wave. That's something which I'm looking forward to know and to hear. We have discussion. The previous waves of immigration view the fourth wave as people who have high level of aspiration and needs. Unfortunately, they don't realize that some guidance at the beginning would be a great help. By guidance, I mean some referral services on resettlement housing. And I think that quote is now held thanks to that Ukrainian Manitoba group. That's where you ask questions and people share perspective. And every question which I've seen, I recently went through the group just to see, was at least answered once. So at least somebody shared their experience of where to go, for example, to buy Ukrainian food, or go to find Ukrainian lawyer, or connect with Ukrainian notary, or find Ukrainian dentist, or connect with other things. So all of those things which were missing now become more organized and connected. Actually, that's an exciting to looking. And the same as service providers. Since Immigrant primarily dealt with Canadian organization, that was happened 10 years ago, sharing, such as the International Center. I did not request any help from the Ukrainian community. I obtained lots of information about services in Winnipeg and the Red River, at that time, ASL. The school provided me with all the answers regarding adaptation of services in Winnipeg. I'll find out what's happening now. Do people still go to international community, or they now come to the Ukrainian community for the services? That's something which will be good to know. And access to information. That was a big concern last time. Lack of information, none available. Now we have more accessible, more available. But the question is, do everybody use Facebook? Do everyone knows that Facebook group exists? Is this information shared with others? How's the spread of information where you know that there is resources? Oh, and because I was away from Winnipeg, I did in Kamloops, that's the concerns which learned from my study. In Kamloops, I was able to put the full gap. One thing, I created my website, which helps a lot in terms of newcomers. And I created a website based on the concerns last year, so it will be interesting to know what Ukrainians are finding in terms of their needs, what their needs are identified. So my website is primarily to Kamloops, because I currently live in Kamloops. So the goal is that every immigrant who comes to Kamloops through either TRU or immigrant services get information about the website, and they can attend free course. So I deliver a free course in Kamloops for newcomers once a year. Where we go, we have 13 lectures based on the needs. Actually, some of them was starting because I was luckily teaching the Scandal Social Sciences, connecting with a number of issues connecting to family and as well as my study. So we cover housing, we do cover banking, healthcare, education and employment, child family services, taxes, shopping, and every other connection. So what technically it means that whenever immigrant comes, they will know what the main industries in Kamloops where you can get employment. I put all of the employment websites on one resources. They know where the education is. They know what is child family services. Winnipeg, Kamloops has a very big problem with doctors. It takes up to 3 years to get a doctor, and you only will get a doctor if you put yourself on a list. So for newcomers, if you don't tell about that there is a list where you need to dial 811 and ask yourself to put on a list, they will never have access to the doctor because that's how it's based on which one. There is a very lack of, so I usually go through those things to explain what the services government provide, what's the idea, and one of the good things about this website, it's accessible to everyone. Meaning, you can be around the world and you can already learn about what is Kamloops, what is idea. My hope, and this is what I was talking yesterday with some of my students, to do one for Welcome to Winnipeg. But it's another project which I think will be good, helpful to that concern is Ukrainian Winnipeg. Welcome to Ukrainian Winnipeg, where all of the resources and services are put together, and you can actually go into that resource and find every single website where it will list all Ukrainian doctors or you list all Ukrainian lawyers, and that's how it works in BC. So all of those, there is 400 links, and they are done by immigrants to Kamloops. They usually come to the lecture. I ask what question do they have. I try to answer them based on what I know. I talk to people in Kamloops around the area, and then put everything online. So all of the basic needs in such a way are met. We've been quite lucky. This year in Tier U, got 600 international students. When I did a presentation for 600 students, that was quite a large group. But now they all have resources where they can go and connect. I don't know how Ukrainian community will be on connecting to this particular area. But that's another way how to build community and promote that access to information, which was lacking in that particular time. So when we start seeing there is still lots of unanswered questions, and for sure there is many challenges which my participants shared with me in terms of, I think I was a strong person spending 1 year in Canada. I simply survived that year. I put aside my depression of my previous life. They simply stopped to exist. I start accepting life on the everyday basis that allowed me to slow down, look at my life and live further. I stopped crying. So we hope that this process will be faster, so people don't need to live 1 year in this depression mood and connecting to resources. If they know what's available, what's accessible, where you get services, how do you do? And that's something which I'm quite excited by having Ukrainian Winnipeg, one of the sources which I was sharing, and having that Facebook group that looks like a great connection. However, what I'm noticing is also, I went to Congress in Regina. There is mostly no research on recent Ukrainian immigrants, meaning we don't know what's happened to them, are they present, are they here, can they come, where, in terms of what should be done to set things right, because how we reach population, how we ensure that those concerns which were raised either communicated earlier so people will not be disappointed when they come and realize their degree is not recognized, or from Ukraine, or there is no housing, or there is no job, or there is challenge to get moved into education because of English language. If all of those can be communicated earlier, we will avoid those frustrations when people come as much as possible. Possibly, I don't know, but we can at least minimize. That's something which is a good idea. So if you, that's what I want to share today in terms of what's currently happening, and that's the answer to the question. Is there a need to new study? Do we need to find out what's happening with? Yes or no? Some people say yes. It will be interesting to ask newcomers. And to get access to them, it's the only way so far I found. The easiest one is Ukrainian Winnipeg group. That's actually where I've seen the most connection by being on distance. Why? Because I'm away. But that's one of the ways how to do it. And hopefully, ideally, there will be no challenges for Ukrainian immigration, at least to understand the Canadian system and to know what is available, accessible. Might not be able to solve all the problems of foreign recognition. That's require policy change, that's require more advocacy, that require many more lobbying to ensure that people get support, but at least to provide the beginning stage. I've seen a lot of change in the last 3 years. If you look how many events happening, even 2 days ago when I came to Winnipeg, there was a protest against putting in jail one of the Ukrainian activists in Donetsk. So Ukrainian community is active, Ukrainian community is doing lots of work. We need to keep sharing, building resources and strengthening supports to people's success in Canada and in Winnipeg particularly. So thanks so much.
Are there any questions maybe for Sashko that you have in mind? 1 or 2 questions? Sure you want to talk to him individually later on?
Sashko, did you check any Ukrainian resources? What do they say about immigrants in here? Do they have an interest?
Yes, that's actually a good question. Thank you so much for asking. Because when I went to Canadian resources, that's where CEUs provided a bulletin, I was trying to see if there's any research across Canada on Ukrainian immigration. And there was none. Actually, all of the publication, which I was looking very strong focus on Holodomor, focusing on historical issue, but not on immigrants current. In Ukraine, actually much more. I've seen more interest in Ukrainian academics to learn about what's happening in Canada. There is a number of websites. I actually seen an amazing project done by students, which were looking on Ukrainian Canadian famous people. Posted all online on YouTube to learn and to raise pride of the Canadian community. There is more information on what's available in Canada, but I also seen quite an interesting discussion in online community on Ukraine in terms of challenges of the immigration process. People were not still provided with the idea that immigration is very hard, very inaccessible, very challenging, but not giving any resources of what to do. So that's something which I also start seeing. So immigration is discouraged, and not supported in the way of sharing resources. So that's one of this. I need to check with people in Ukraine what's their perception in Ukraine about the immigration process. But that's where I have the hardest part to do. So thank you for asking, because we need to get more information sharing about what is immigration. People do not know.
Any other question? 1 more question? Yes?
I liked your phrase at the beginning. You talked about self-identification, those who identify themselves as Ukrainian. And that's a tough question. When I go to the border at Pembina and they ask what I am, who I am, they don't want to know that I'm Ukrainian. In fact, that would probably push me aside and I wouldn't get through. They want to know that I'm Canadian. But when they mean Canadian, they don't mean that I'm First Nations. I'm not. So it's a complicated, so to self-identify, it also means to self-identify where and for whom. And a typical quote-unquote Ukrainian Canadian today is of mixed background. It may be that the father is Ukrainian and the mother is something else. So it gets very complicated in terms of who you are, really, and who you're talking to.
Definitional questions are the hardest one to answer because they are based on self-determination of how a person identifies Ukrainian. What I do only for the studies, that's why the definition which I use for the study is a person who actually immigrated to Canada from Ukraine from that period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever year was 1991, if anybody who immigrated from Ukraine considered to be Ukraine, but you're right, the person might not identify as Ukrainian when they come, or they might become Canadian citizen very in terms of time, and they will identify very differently on the census. So you're right, we do not know the full extent of immigration because of the challenges of census or even definition of who we are in terms of Ukrainian, Canadian. But what we know, there is still people who migrate at this time, and they come from a country, what type of support from Ukraine, that's what they come because they have Ukrainian passports. That's how Canadian government gets data in terms of how many people get PR, permanent residence, or when they become citizens because they have Ukrainian passport. So that's a definition which they use to define Ukrainian. But when you are in Canada, definition will change and changes. Thank you.
Well, some research that I did on the second immigration, juvenile delinquency, I did the study not with the intention of studying Ukrainians, but that was one of the conclusions. the Ukrainians identified them in 3 different categories: Ukrainians, Ruthenians, and Austrians. And until today, relatives of Korins here refer to themselves as Austrians, not as Ukrainians. So I don't know how reliable those figures are.
Completely correct. It's based on the census data. Based on the data how people identify themselves as Ukrainian. So those, every year, compendium, which was pulled together based on Ukrainians in Canada, that's what I used to get those numbers, were saying how many people identified Ukrainian. But you're right, it will exclude many groups which will not identify at the time Ukrainian, but were Ukrainian.
Those figures have to be looked at again.
Yes, completely correct, and that's something which I have the hardest time to know, because based on definition, again, whatever you choose definition, you will have a certain exclusion criteria and certain inclusion criteria. This was only done based on Ukrainian was defined, but you're right. Geographically, at that time, Ruthenians, Galiciani, all of them have different categories, but they were not Ukrainian based.
Bukovina was a separate country in relation now from Ukraine. These are separate
Completely
countries.
correct. So that's only based on definition Ukrainian. That's the limitation.
Professor Bal?
Yeah, thank you, Sasha. I think we should start a Ukrainian study center at TRU. But anyway, I like the presentation because you gave us these, the waves. But what is stuck to me is, whatever wave it is, at the end of the day, immigrants are immigrants, right? Like I'm looking at Indian immigrants, for example. So why is that you have not touched churches? I've been to Ukrainian church, I've been to Methodist, United churches that you have taken me. Church could be a place where a lot of social services, a lot of networking could have taken place, must be taking place already. And there are these clusters now happening. Transkona is becoming a Ukrainian hub. Maybe another place, making a Nepali hub. This clusters takes place, and this is how the immigrants, find their own roots. When I go to Vancouver, I will go to Surrey because that's where Indians are. That's where I feel, secure. So why is that you have not included those, features into your study, in addition to the virtual resources that you talked about?
Good, again, question. Churches will come to community connection and organization. You're right. I haven't discussed a lot in terms of role of the church. But what was interesting at that time, people who were responding were not citing churches as the main areas of support. So, but you're right. Historically, if you look at every way, church is a place of gathering and community connection, and that's something which I want to actually see more in the future. What's the role of the church in new Ukrainian immigration? Are Ukrainians coming to see church as a support service? Is the church provides that spiritual need, which was very strong in the first, second, and third wave of immigration? Is the fourth Ukrainian immigration will identify church as the main support? So yeah, that's a good question. That's another reason why we need to see the study, because the role of the church is changing. And how to make sure that people come to the community. And in many places they do. Like in Winnipeg, there's so many Ukrainian churches where people come, but do they connect to new Ukrainian communities? That's where actually is a good reason to study. And to build a new structure in terms of what's the role of the church.
Thank you very much. Just a quick reference, you mentioned Ukrainian Canadian literature. A good name, one of our former residents or visiting profs that we had was Oleksandr, who's a specialist in the area, and I believe he's put out a 2-volume in English, All Ukrainians in Canada. We have it upstairs. We can share that document with you if you need access to it. But he also spent time at the University of Alberta, so he's done an extensive amount of research in that area. So we were happy that he has been part of our center also. I want to take just the opportunity on behalf of the center basically to thank everyone for coming out. And hopefully you enjoyed the session itself. I found it very much interesting because it gave us a quick glimpse of the waves that he referred to. I'm sure there might be more waves as we began to talk over coffee in the process itself. But he gave us at least a highlight of the various reasons why people may be left and the challenges that they face in the immigration process. And you're right, some of those challenges are still remaining with us. If it's credentials, recognition of degrees, language issues, acceptance of the new immigrants into the current
population. So I mean, a lot of those issues, religious and others, what you've done 10 years ago, it would be interesting to see if, to what extent it has changed. I'm sure there's a potential for a number of master's or PhD studies right in those areas that you've identified. So on behalf of the center, thank you very much for coming out. We were in contact, and I was hoping that you would accept coming back, visiting us again in Winnipeg, and hopefully sharing with us a little bit of information about what's happening.
And we can keep doing the studies.
So thank you very much.